Hi everyone. I'm going to wait for everyone to get on. I hopped on a moment early to give folks a chance to come on. Let me know when you're on. Say hello. I'm just looking over some questions until a few people hop on. Glad we have lots of questions today. We're talking about handling others' grief, so how others have reactions to our grief. So I'm sure we will have a lot of folks with things to say. Say hello when you do hop on. I'm giving folks a moment to come on and join us in this live Facebook. Today we're going to talk about handling others' reactions to your grief. So we've received a lot of questions, and I see a few people are hopping on. Say hello when you're there. I'll try to bring my little comments up. Patricia says hello. Hi, Patricia. All right, welcome everyone. I'm David Kessler. I'm glad you joined us today. We're going to be talking about handling others' reactions to our grief. Diane, hi. Diana, welcome. Glad you joined us. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Well, I'm David Kessler, and I'm so glad to be with you today to do this online talk about how to handle other people when we're grieving. Because people have reactions to our grief just like they seem to have reactions to everything else in our world. So I wanted to give you some resources and take a few questions and talk about them. Many of you have sent questions in already, and I'm going to answer them. If you still want to send a question in, feel free to, and I'll do my best to answer it during this segment. All right. So first of all, I just want to say the idea of handling other people's reaction to your grief breaks my heart a bit. I feel like, oh my gosh, haven't you been through enough that on top of everything you've been through, you now have to deal with other people's reactions? So I know it can be very challenging. I'm curious, for those of you who are already on, and those of you who are continuing to watch, what are some of the reactions you've experienced from other people about your grief? How have they reacted to what you've done? You know, one of the things I often think about is we really live in a grief illiterate society. We don't know what our great-grandparents knew. We don't know often how to grieve and how to be around other people who are grieving. So I hope we'll get some helpful information here today. So first of all, people have all kinds of reactions to our grief. They don't want to be around our grief. They think we should be doing our grief differently. They think we should cry more. They think we should cry less. They think we should be over it already. They think it's time to move on. The reality is, our grief probably makes them uncomfortable. I love, Patricia just said, uncomfortable with my crying. Exactly right. Our grief makes them uncomfortable for a number of reasons. Think about it. One, it reminds them of their own mortality. And it also reminds them that they could have someone die like we did. You know, bereaved parents will all the time hear, I can't imagine that. I would hate for my child to die. And the bereaved parents feeling like, oh my gosh, we were dealing with my grief and all of a sudden you're imagining your child dying. Isn't my child enough that they died? So people take your grief and then go to themselves, right? And that's how they have a reaction that many times is more about them than it is about you, which then of course makes us uncomfortable, us feel unseen. And you know, as you've heard me say many times, if you've been watching my Facebook Lives, grief must be witnessed. We want our grief witnessed by another person. We weren't meant to be islands of grief. So a couple of things I just want to share that I think may be helpful for those of you watching now and those of you who will watch this later. Grieving is what we do on the inside. Mourning is what we do on the outside. So people actually can never see our grief. You can't see someone else's grief. You can't tell how much someone's crying, how much someone's grieving by whether they're crying or not crying. One of the things I think as I get older is I think back on some of the things my parents said that I thought, oh, my parents don't know anything when I was young. They said, you'll never understand me until you walk a mile in my shoes. And I thought, oh my gosh, isn't that true in grief? You will never understand what someone in grief is going through until you walk a mile in their shoes. So let's talk about some ways we can handle it, and then I want to read some of your questions that you've sent in. So how do we handle grief in the moment when someone says something to us that obviously doesn't resonate? So I've heard all different things. I never know what's correct for you, so I'm going to give you lots of options that you can try out and see what feels right for you. And this is what other people have told me over the years. I've heard people say, I'm sorry my grief is making you uncomfortable, but I have to grieve for my loved one. I mean, that's kind of an in-your-face one. I realize you think you know how I should grieve, but my loss is different than yours, and I have to grieve it in the way that's right for me. Sometimes you can say to someone, that's just not helpful. A lot of times people go, oh, because the truth is, people don't mean to say things that come across wrong. They're not really meant to do that. They don't mean to hurt us in grief. But the reality is, no one teaches us how to grieve. Grief is missing in our society these days. We have a get over it society, so we don't teach grief. Another one might be, I know you meant that in a kind way, but just know it backfired. I know you meant that in a kind way, but just know it backfired. Another option is to just say thank you. Even though you just may feel it's horrible, you don't like it, you could just say thank you, because they are trying to support you in their own way. You can ignore it. You don't have to stop in the middle of your grief to handle what's going on with them. I want to repeat that. You don't have to stop your grief process to handle what's going on with someone else and their reaction. So that leads me to, how do we handle it in ourselves? First of all, inside of you, one of the first things you have to do is when someone says something off-putting, not helpful, not kind, whatever it may be, you have to just know they don't know my loved one the way I do. They don't know my relationship with the person who died. They don't know this loss. They don't know it the way that I do. My love is very personal. They don't get it, and they might never get it. They might never get it. The reality is, the only person who has to fully understand your grief is you. The only person that has to fully understand your grief is you. Now, when I say that, people aren't thrilled with it, but look, I, like you, I wish I could tell you I'm going to promise you a world where everyone's going to understand your grief and understand your yearning and understand your pain. I haven't found that to be planet Earth yet. So that's why I don't want to give you any false hope. Just know, as long as you get your grief, that's all that matters. Someone said to me online They were talking about someone's reaction. And I said to them, their reaction is really none of your business. And they actually thought I was being quip or rude or whatever it was. But I really mean that. People are going to have all kinds of reactions. And their reaction doesn't have to shape your grief or touch your grief or harm your grief in any way. Sometimes we do have to ignore it. And I want to give a shout out to all the people who do say the right things out there. There are people who have been through loss or loved ones and family friends who their reactions are so spot on. And I'm so thrilled when I hear those stories. So by the way, I asked you to share any negative reactions. You can also share any positive reactions that you've had from other people. I don't want this to just be talking about the negative. The other thing that I've heard people say sometimes is, I'm so glad you don't understand my grief. I don't wish this loss on anyone. Because that's often the truth. We don't want this pain to be on anyone. And yet we are dealing with this horrible pain inside of us that other people might not get. I was driving today and I saw a sign that said, none of us are well until all of us are well. And I thought, that's so beautiful. None of us are well until all of us are well. And then I thought about it and I went, oh no, we're in trouble. Because it may be a while till all of us get things. It may be a while till all of us are well. So until everyone's well, we have to take care of ourselves. And I always say we grieve as a tribe, but some of us won't get it. Hi, Lisette. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm David Kessler. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about handling other people's reactions to our grief. And if you have questions, please put them on. And let's see, someone just bought my book. Wonderful. Which one did you buy? Jamaica, hello. Great. Lisette's saying, I'm trying to get on. Lisette, you are on. Mary, hi, Mary. So I'd love to hear the good things you've heard from other people, the good reactions, and the bad ones, if you want to type some of those in. So I want to go to some questions in a moment that people have sent in early. And I just want to remind you of some resources you have. Just know Legacy has wonderful groups. I hope you will check out. Many of their support groups can be so helpful. I have aboutgrief.com is a good resource on the basics of grief. And if you are dealing with a loved one who died by suicide, I also have griefsuicide.com that will give you a lot of resources to deal with reactions people may have to a death by suicide. All right, let's get to some questions here. This is from Mary Jane. She said, this question came up. After my daughter died, my brother said if something like this happened to him, he'd burn all his photos. Okay, well, that's what he would do. I wouldn't do it, but that's what your brother might do. Others have to endure posts on social media that their child has said something about their parents. All children say something about their parents, bad or good at some time. How do we handle complete jerks and let them know their behavior is completely uncalled for and unwelcome? As for me, I've cut off relationships with these people and I don't miss them. If they ever grow a heart, one day I might miss them, but I don't think I will. All right, well, let's look here. Let me address a few of these things. First of all, when people tell me their loved one is a complete jerk in grief, I'll often go, were they a jerk before? Because the reality is, people kind of stay in character. You know, it's interesting. We have a belief that in grief, people are going to rise to a higher level. And if they said stupid things before, surely they're not going to say stupid things in grief. And yet they do. So people stay consistent. Sometimes kind people stay kind and jerks stay jerks and stupid people say stupid things. And so another option is to say, you know, that's not kind. That's not supportive. And you might consider it a teaching moment. That's not kind. Let me tell you what would be helpful. And you might teach that person in that moment. And you know what? In your grief, you may feel like it's not my place to teach. I don't have the energy for that. I get that. That's okay. Karen writes, my sister died 2 years ago, and no one in the family calls me anymore. It was gradual then after her death, and it was sealed. One reason is they're anti-LGBTQ. I'm gay. So, Karen, sometimes right after a death, people actually do become more kind, and then it sounds like you felt that weighing away because of who you are. The truth is, I just want you to know, and this is true for everyone in every group and every race and every type of person in the world, no matter who you are, grief is about love, and we all grieve. So I am so sorry that they are not there for you the way they should be, because your loss is no less than anyone else's loss, and don't buy into that. And I know it can be challenging, so I'm so sorry you're having to deal with that. Thank you, Karen. Amy says, how do you handle loved ones' collections? Addicts collect things, and they're destructive to boot. I'm a widow with 3 children. The oldest is 8. My husband passed away 4 weeks ago. I'm trying to do my best to take care of my grief, my kids, tackle the destruction of our yard and home. I've got a big trailer. I'm loading it with trash. I need to sell whatever is collected of a value because he was our only provider. I have a problem with people's opinions and them thinking I should just have everything taken to the dump or scrap yard. It wasn't their husband, and they are not broke with their family not helping them. All right, well, first of all, Amy, how tragic it is that you're dealing with this loss just 4 weeks ago, which that really was yesterday in terms of grief. And I would say to you, once again, no one is in your shoes. If you have to sell things to make ends meet, that's what you have to do. You have to do what you need to do to take care of your kids. If anyone's judging you about how you're handling the belongings, you could say to them, I'd rather not be giving these things away or selling them, but I have no money. Can you help? Because it is tragic that people will judge people in need. So I'm so sorry you're having to deal with all this. And just know your instincts as a parent to do what you need to provide for your children are really what's best in this case. And I do hope you get some support and help. You can reach out. I don't know if it's possible to reach out to friends on Facebook and saying, my husband died financially. I'm having a tough time. There's GoFundMe pages. So just know, I hope you get the emotional support and also some financial support from those in your world. Okay, this person wants to remain anonymous. They told me a lot about a number of things that went wrong with their husband who worked in the hospital. It's always tough to see. I worked in a hospital for years, how things work on the inside and how going from working in the hospital to a patient's never fun. And it looks like so many things went wrong. I don't want to go into the details, but I just want to hit on a couple of things. You do talk about him having a cardiac arrest and how that looked. And I just want, for those of you who haven't seen it, CPR is a brutal thing to watch. It is a very invasive treatment, and it is tough to watch that on your loved one. So in the best scenarios, it's hard to watch. It's not like it looks like on TV. Then she goes on to say that when he died, right before, there was a nurse there, and she felt like he was struggling, and so she told him it was okay for him to go. That was not her responsibility or her job, and she should have asked me. So I agree. It is not a healthcare person's place to tell someone it's their time to die or it's okay to let go. It became very fashionable for a while to tell people who are dying it's okay to let go. I mean, I remember literally one person in a hospice telling me, if one more person tells me to let go, they're going to kill them. But of course, she should not be doing that. Now, I want to tell you, she was coming from a kind place. And I know you're afraid that her saying it is what made your husband die. And I always tell people, what preceded the death did not cause the death. So think about that. What preceded the death did not cause the death. So I would write a letter to that hospital administration and just ask them to please talk to this nurse, that it caused a lot of anxiety in you and that it wasn't her place to tell anyone to let go. And then you clearly have a fear here, and I can understand why, that, you know, his spirit might have left because of her. You're giving her too much power. Your husband died at the moment he died, and I'm so sorry he died, but don't get distracted by what the nurse said. She doesn't have that much power to change death. If she did, she'd be bringing us all back to life. Thank you for writing in. Things go on like that in the hospital. It can be disturbing. Reese writes, I'm in a grief fog, unable to concentrate. How do we get unstuck? Well, Reese, that is what grief feels like sometimes. We talk about grief brain. We talk about grief fog. And you are going to go through that at times. That's one of the reasons we often say in early grief, in your first year, in your second year, try not to make big decisions, especially financial ones if you don't have to. But just know grief brain is normal, grief fog is normal. Be okay with asking for loved ones how to help. You know, help me, I'm having trouble concentrating. That is what grief feels like. I wish I had a better answer for it. Pamela writes on my Instagram page, what can I do about when no one asks about my feelings and they act like nothing happened and everything's fine now? So it is heartbreaking when you are deep in your loss and you begin to notice the world around you has moved on. And you probably got more attention during the loss. You might have even gotten a little on the anniversary. But then everyone moves on and you're stuck in that horrible, horrible loss. And I just need you to know two things. You remember, you still feel it. I hope you'll go online in some of the groups, legacy groups, other places, and share about your loved ones so we can all still witness your grief. And people are self-absorbed. They are going to get back to their lives. They don't mean harm. That's just the reality of our world. All right, let me see. What else do I have here? I just did a retreat. I want to mention this. In the retreat, a couple of things came up. There was a woman whose son had died, I believe at 36 years old, and his girlfriend was attending with her, who had been dating him for 9 months. And I did say to her, I'm so glad in this moment you are all together, you're both together in your grief, but just know your mama, and she's been with him for only 9 months. So just know while you two are getting this closeness in grief, you will have moments you move apart. And as a mother, your grief will be different than anyone else's. The other thing I want to just mention is someone wrote in and said, everyone asks me in my grief, what can they do? I don't know, I'm in grief. So let me just mention this. To everyone who's not in grief, you should not ask people in grief for their list. They are in grief. You can figure out what would help them. One of the things that I thought was so beautiful once that I saw at a funeral was literally the same way at a baby shower, women will have a scribe. Oh, the blue pajamas came from Janet. I saw at a funeral once, everyone coming up to the widow saying, what can I do? What can I do? And there was someone who was a scribe next to her going, well, how do you think you could help? Your kids are in soccer. Great. Could you pick up the kids? Could you deliver a meal? And they were doing it instead of making the person in grief do it. All right, I think some live questions have come up. I'm going to ask Paul to read a couple of them to me real quick.
Quite a few.
All right.
So Joan lost her son this past February.
Joan lost her son this February. I'm so sorry.
Still a question about how he died.
There's still a question about how he died.
Now, her surviving son doesn't want to talk to her anymore.
Her surviving son doesn't want to talk to her anymore.
Along with her brother and his wife that are connected with the son. And also the grandchild isn't a part of her life anymore either. And she's grieving more than one loss.
That's a lot, Joan. I'm so sorry. So first of all, there's a lot of what we call secondary losses. That's what you're experiencing is loss of relationships. First of all, I just want to say, as a bereaved parent, shockingly, and it's true across the board from many children I've heard, siblings don't want to grieve with their parents. That's just a reality. Teenagers don't want to talk to their parents about sex or grief. So just know if you have expectations that your living children might grieve with you, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. I'm so sorry that the family is estranged. I think right now, you just have to care for yourself and be kind for yourself. And in time, see if you can work those things out that have caused those. I'm not privy to that information. But I am so sorry. I hope you'll go into groups, Legacy, other places, to really get support. I'm glad you're here with us today because you need to get support since they're not there. Okay, I'll take another question.
Juanita talks about how her friends ignore her, also telling her to get over it since he's been gone for 21 months.
All right, Juanita is saying her friends tell her to get over it since her loved one is gone for 21 months. I often talk about early grief. Do you know when I believe early grief is? People like, oh, the first 3 days, the first week. No, early grief is the first 2 years. So, Juanita, you're still in early grief. And I'm so sorry that they want you to get over it. They don't understand the loss. They might not. And you can try to help them understand it, and they just might not. So we have to release our expectations. People would like us to wrap our grief up in a bow in 3 days or a year. That's not how it works in real life. And Juanita, someday they're going to know. Someday they're going to have a loss. And you'll be able to be there and help them in a way they weren't able to help you. And I'll tell you, people in grief will tell me all the time, someone comes up to them a year or 2, 5 years later, after they're dealing with grief themselves and say, oh my gosh, Juanita, I never understood what was going on with you. I'm so sorry I didn't get it then. They will someday, unfortunately. Okay?
Teresa wants to know, how do you handle being ignored by their siblings? No phone calls.
Teresa wants to know how you handle being ignored by their siblings. You know, you could reach out and say, listen, in grief, I don't deserve to be ignored. Or you could find support elsewhere. But I am so sorry. Isn't it just tragic when you're dealing with loss that you have to deal with all these other elements out there? So I am sorry you're having to deal with that. I wish I knew how to get them back for you, but you may have to find other resources for a bit. Okay? Is there another one?
Patricia wants, she's just commenting about how people get uncomfortable with her crying.
Absolutely. People are uncomfortable with crying, and that is a reality. And I always say these tears are evidence of love. I see Lisa Ann just wrote, how do you decide what you want to live after your loved one dies? Want to move, maybe Jacksonville. Can you see the rest there?
Yeah, well, I have. Lisa
Sure.
Ann also says, how do you get rid of a travel trailer and a sound system? And also rude comments like, I'm sorry about Ron, then 2 seconds later, we gotta go.
People do say rude things. It really is tragic that that is the reality, but that is it. And First of all, when we talk about dealing with a loved one's belongings, I always say take pictures of them if you want to remember their belongings, just to have them if you do want to let them go or feel the need to let them go. And, how to let those things go, that I wouldn't be able to tell you. There's Goodwill, there's eBay, there's a million things out there. I unfortunately don't know the best way for you to let go of those things. But my guess is if you post it online and just say, what's the best way for me to let these things go? Your Facebook friends will give you lots of suggestions. Thank you. Is there another one?
David White talks about how his loved one's death was declared a suicide.
David said his loved one's death was declared a suicide.
By the ME.
By the medical examiner, okay?
But because of the circumstances, no one in our family believes it, and we have the burden of keeping this a secret from all of the inner circle.
All right, but because of that, you have the burden of keeping it a secret. And I'll tell you, the problem is secrecy often creates shame. And it is so sad that we have so much shame these days around death by suicide, which we're learning so much about it that it's not what we thought it used to be. So the reality is, for some people, there's a lot of stigma around death by suicide, and that's maybe why they want to keep it a secret. I would suggest to you, since you're dealing with this, as I mentioned, I do have a 3-part free course called that you can look up at griefsuicide.com. And I think it'll help you deal with some answers, and anyone else who's dealing with a loss by the death of a loved one through suicide, maybe check that out. It'll go into more depth. Jessica says, how do I feel like I have a purpose again after my only child died from an addiction? Jessica, how long ago did they die, I wonder? Do you see that? How long? Okay. So Jessica, how long ago did they die, if you would let me know that? So a few things I would say until I can see that is, one, purpose takes time. But when people say they want to live again, and in 5 months, Jessica, your son died day before yesterday. 5 months is just the other day. So at this point, I would say to you, it's okay not to have a purpose. And in time, when you're ready, you might ask what feels meaningful to do with your life. You could ask what would honor him. What could you do that would honor his memory, honor his life? It could be something for bereaved parents. It could be something in the field of addiction. It may be a lot of things that you will feel in time. But at 5 months, you're just in deep grief. You're just in the thick of it. And, the only thing I would point out to you about life continuing is sometimes when people say, oh my gosh, I don't feel like my life's going to continue. I tell them to look at their fingernails, look at their toenails. Life is continuing. We are meant to continue after loss. It's shocking, but our soul, our psyche, our body is actually designed to take a number of huge hits this lifetime. And death of a child, I unfortunately know that one myself. It's one of the worst hits. There's, death. These are all horrible things we're all going through. And just know you've got to be gentle, and purpose may come in time, and it may look like just doing some meaningful things. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you'll check out the resources on Legacy.com and in the Legacy groups. I hope you'll check out aboutgrief.com and griefsuicide.com for resources. Thank you for joining. If you know someone who's having trouble handling other people's reactions, I hope you'll share this video with them. So thank you so much. If I didn't get to your question, I'll do my best to answer it online. Thanks so much for being here today. And I'm thinking of you and sending you love from all of us here. Thanks so much.